Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the Fisher Random or Chess 9LX event being held here in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, as you guys know, I played 3 games yesterday. All 3 games were a draw, but today I wanted to see if I could get on the scoreboard with some dubs. So let's jump right into the action. So here we go. First game of the day, round number 4. I'm playing with the black piece against Fabiano Caruana, and the game starts out with d4. Now, as you know, or as you may not know, of course, this event is Fisher Random, so all the pieces on the back rank are assembled slightly differently than in normal chess. So we get d4. I play the move d5 here. It's kind of interesting to see these review notes of the game, because obviously I had no idea of knowing whether these moves were good or not. We basically have 15 minutes before each game to try and analyze. So we get d4, d5. Fabiano plays this move, bishop b4, and now I played this move e6. Now, it's worth pointing out, of course, that all these moves appear to be best, but before the game, when I was analyzing with Wesley So and Gary Kasparov, we were actually very concerned about this position with bishop to b4, simply because what's happening here is white can bring the knight out to g3 at some point. Say you go a move like, let's say knight g3 and bishop b5, for example. The knight guards the pawn on e2, and white can simply castle, and once you move your knight, let's say white goes c3 here, with these bishops on b1 and b4, white has a very serious attack. It's not really clear how you're going to castle. Now, you could technically, I believe, castle here, but you would hang a rook on f8, and there's no reason to hang a rook for no reason. So we were actually very concerned about this position after bishop b4, but we did conclude e6 probably is the best move. And here Fabiano plays this move knight g3, which is apparently already an inaccuracy. Now, I believe the computer here wants white to play this move c3 here, simply opening both of these diagonals. Don't ask me why it's best, but I'm guessing if knight g6, now white can go h4, trying to push Harry the h pawn, and the knight on g6 is going to get dislodged. And if you play h5, white might be able to trade the bishop for the pawn, and here you have these very ugly double pawns on g7 and g6, which simply don't look right. Maybe white can start bringing the knights in, maybe knight f3, knight e5, or knight f3, knight g5 here, and it feels like white probably has an advantage. Alas, Fabiano played the move knight g3. Here I played the move h5, and now Fabiano plays the move h4, stopping me from playing h4 myself. But after h4 is played, I now go b6 here with the idea of trying to push for c5, and the idea here is to simply close down this diagonal. Now, you will note that black is a little bit more of a center, so let's say white were to play c3, c5, and bishop a3. I might even have a move like e5, trying to build this big black center on the 5th rank, potentially. So Fabiano plays move c4 here. I take on c4. He decides to throw in the tickle with bishop to e7. Now, if Fabiano were to capture right away, I could simply play c5, and there is a pin on the rook on d1. If you take the pawn, you lose the rook. And if you play a move like rook to c1 here, I felt that after knight c7, d takes c5, and knight d5, black has a lot of play here. The knight is attacking the bishop. I can always trade the bishop for the knight on g3. I have a d file. I have a c file potentially, and it just doesn't feel right for white. So Fabiano plays bishop e7, forcing rook to d7. If I were to play the move rook to d5, there's this move bishop e4, and the rook on d5 is under attack. If you move the rook to d7, white can trade and not push the pawn, take the knight on a8, and white is much better. Apparently c6 maybe is still possible because you can take the knight and win the bishop, but at any rate, it didn't look right. So I play rook d7, Fabiano trades, and now I can no longer castle my king since I have captured a piece and or moved it. So after king f8, Fabiano plays queen c4. I play this move c5 here, trying to put pressure on the pawn on d4 as well as the d file, but also opening up the scope for the bishop on b8. Now, the rook on d7 is fine, but it would be much nicer if I could magically, say, put the rook on d8 here, because then this light square bishop would have a lot more scope. At any rate, I play c5, we get knight b3, and now I play this move knight to c7 here, and Fabiano ends up castling queenside. Now, this move took me by surprise. It is not the move that I was expecting in this position at all. I was expecting Fabiano to try and castle to the king side. I felt that if you were to castle to the king side, I could play queen d8, pinning the pawn on d4, and after white plays a move like e3, it feels like after a move like knight d5, black should be in the game. As I just realized, there also is a pawn that's hanging on h4, so we, of course, have the classic right triangle. So Fabiano castles queenside, and now I play this move queen a6, which is apparently not the best move, but we were both getting a little bit low on time here. I wasn't sure what the right approach was. Now, I really like queen a6 for a couple of reasons. The problem here for me is that I have this bishop on e8 that's blocked by the rook. I can't castle my king because I've moved it, obviously, and the rook on h8 is very passive. So with all these passive pieces, what I want to do is see if I can trade, because in the end game, I'm going to have the pair of bishops. So I play the move Queen A6 here, and Fabiano trades. Now, the reason I was very happy with this is because if Fabiano does not trade the queen, say he goes Queen C2, now I have C4 attacking the knight here. If you go to A1, it's a very ugly square, and after knight D5, I'm threatening to trade. Say you play a move like A3 here, stopping knight B4, I can swap and fork the queen and the rook here. And if you play a move like, I don't know, like knight F1, for example, I can go knight B4, hitting the pawn and the queen at the same time, and probably winning the game. So Fabiano trades, but because Fabiano is trading to an endgame here, I now have the bishop pair, and I'm feeling very, very good about the position. Fabiano takes on c5, I take on g3, he takes, we trade all the pieces down, and now he goes bishop e4, king e7, bishop f3, and here I play this move g6, trying to guard the pawn on the h5 square. So I play g6, Fabiano goes king c2, and now I play this move a5. Apparently an inaccuracy, not really sure why, but at this point I figured the game probably should be a draw. Fabiano has these double g pawns on g3 and g2. They're not really going anywhere, but at the same time, they are the opposite color of my light square bishop, so I can't easily attack these pawns. So Fabiano goes king c3. Now I play rook c7 here, trying to keep the two rooks on the board. Fabiano's one advantage here is if he can trade... Man, my mouse is off. If you can trade the rooks and get the king somehow to say, let's say rook d1, rook c7, and king c4, white might have a small advantage here because with the active king, the weak pawn on c5, and control of the d file, white could potentially win. So we get king c3. I play rook c7, rook d2 is played, and now I go a4 here, trying to stop Fabiano from pushing pawns on the queen side. But more importantly here, I simply want to play bishop d7 and then bring the other rook into the game. So we get rook d1, I play bishop b5 here. Now bishop d7 also would be playable, but after rook d6 and rook b8, white can go rook a6 here, putting pressure on the pawn. And if I were to play a move like, let's just say rook a7, now white can go rook b6, claiming the b file, and white should have a small advantage. So I go bishop b5, we get e3, I play rook b8, and now Fabiano plays g4 here. With the rook on b8 and the bishop on b5, white can never infiltrate. Even if you get rook d6 and I play a move like king f8, or not king f8, I guess king e8 here, white has no entries on the 6th rank here. All of these squares are covered, and for that reason, white can never claim an advantage. So we get g4, we trade, I go bishop c6, Fabiano plays bishop f3. Now he could have tried g3 here, but after bishop d5, suddenly you have this weak pawn on a2, and now the pawn on a4 makes a lot of sense because b3 is no longer a move since it would hang a pawn. If white ever goes to a3, then there's rook b3 check, and you win the pawn on e3. So white had some issues with the slightly weak pawn on a2. At any rate, Fabiano plays bishop f3, we swap, and now I play this move c4, trying to be very tricky. Now, at first glance, c4 looks like a terrible move because after rook d4, suddenly the pawn on c4 is hanging. But when I go c4, I have a very devilish idea here, which is I want to push the a pawn and sacrifice it. Now, the reason this move is so good is that if white were to play a move like e4, after a3, you no longer can play b3 because when I take, it's simply check and you lose the game. Additionally, if you play a3, then I have rook b3, king d4, and after c3 takes, suddenly all the pawns on the 3rd rank are going to fall, and black should be winning. So he plays rook d4, but now I can go a3. Also worth pointing out, of course, a3 here is no good because after b3, there's no pawn on c4, and now white actually might even have a small advantage. So I go c4, rook d4, now I play a3, Fabiano plays rook d2, I play rook b7 here, forcing Fabiano to commit to some plan with the pawn on b2, because if he doesn't commit and he takes after a takes b2, I simply win the game. So in this position, Fabiano plays rook d2, I go rook b7, and now he plays b takes a3. Really the only move in the position, but now after rook to a8, it's getting very tricky because all of white's pawns are very weak. These pawns on a3 and a2 are under attack, the pawns on e3 and f3 are going to be under attack, and even the h pawn is potentially a weakness. With Fabiano being down about 2.5 minutes here on the clock, he simply starts to struggle. He plays king c4, I take on a3, he goes rook d3, I check, he goes king c3, and now I play this move rook to a7. Now, the reason that I did not take the pawn on h4 here is because after rook h4 and e4, even though material is even and black might still have a small advantage, white has a very obvious plan to start pushing pawns on the queens, or push the a pawn on the queen side. So I go rook a7 here, basically spying the pawn on a2 and the pawn on h4 at the same time. And now Fabiano plays this move e4. Now, I was very upset when Fabiano played this move because already here, I thought I was going to get pretty decent winning chances. But once he goes e4, the move I'd love to play is rook takes pawn. But after takes, and king d4, rook h2, king e3, rook h4, and rook to a3, for example, even though I have one extra pawn here with 3 versus 2, this is a theoretical draw. So instead, I go king f6 here, trying to keep the game alive, trying to infiltrate with the king to get it to f4 and pressure these two pawns on f3 and e4. Fabiano plays the move rook b2, and now I go king e5. And already, even though the computer thinks this is still a draw with perfect play, it's very, very hard to play because I'm going to win the pawn on a2. I'm getting the king to f4. These two pawns are extremely weak on f3 and e4, and it's just all around a difficult task. So Fabiano plays h5 here. I take the pawn, he checks, king f4, and he decides to take on h5. Now, after rook takes h5, it feels like white is maybe close to saving it, but here I play a very good move, which is rook to a3 check. Now, rook takes a2 might also still be winning, but after rook to h4 check, my king either has to start going forward towards f2, or my king has to go back to e5, and after rook h5, probably white has decent chance to draw the game. So I play rook a3 check, and here Fabiano plays king c2. He cannot go forward here because if he goes king c4, for example, now I have rook c7 check. If the king goes either to b4 or to b5, either way, you lose the rook on d3. And after rook c5, we trade, and I win the rook, and I win the game. And here, after king to d4, I have this nice move, rook to d7, checking the king. And after rook to d5 here, I can swap the rooks, take the rook with the pawn, and I simply have one extra rook, and I will win the game. So Fabiano goes king c2. Also, of course, if you were to go king d4, same thing. There's just rook d7 winning the game. So he goes king c2, and now I take on a2. And here Fabiano essentially loses the game when he plays this move, king d1. Now, this is a horrible move by Fabiano here. What Fabiano should have played was king to c3. Now, this probably is still losing here because after rook to a3 check, king to d4, I can now play this move. I was going to say I can play e5 here. Maybe e5 is not the way to win. Apparently, the computer wants rook a4, king c3, and rook a3, king d4, and it does want e5. And this is winning, because king c4, there's rook c2 check, and if white takes the pawn, I can swap the rooks and take the rook on e5. I don't know why the computer, you could probably see the bar going up and down there, was a little bit confused, but e5 would win the game, because king c4, rook c2, you lose the rook on d3, and after takes, once again, you lose this position as well. So king c3 would lose, but the move here that kind of gives white some hope is this either king to c1 or king to b1. Now, the reason that it's very different than king d1 is when white plays king to b1 here, if I move the rook to, say, g2, there's no mate threat on a1 here because the king on b1 covers that square. Instead, Fabiano plays king d1. Now, here he's very, very low on time. He only had a couple of seconds left on the clock when he played this move, but this move effectively loses the game because now I can play this move rook to g2 here, and suddenly we have the classic ladder checkmate with this rook on g2 and the rook going down to a1. The king is completely stuck. You can't move the king to the second rank, and at this point, there's just no hope for white. So after rook g2, Fabiano plays the move rook to h4 check. I play this move king to e5, and here Fabiano resigns in view of the looming checkmate on a1. If you go king c1, rook to a1 would be checkmate here with the classic ladder. If you play the move rook to h5, now I can play f5, blocking at the pawn. You can't take with rook takes f5, so I simply take. And again, king c1 is mate, and if you go king to e1, I have rook a1 check, rook to d1, rook g1 check, king e2, and then rook takes rook, and I have an extra rook on the board, and I will win the game. Additionally, in this position, if not rook h5, the one other move is f4, or actually not f4, sorry. If f4, you take the pawn on e4, but the one last idea is rook to d2, trying to break the checkmate. But after rook to a1 check, king c2, rook a2, let's say king d3, rook takes d2. Again, I simply have an extra rook on the board, and I will win the game. So white basically has no way of stopping the checkmate without losing at least a rook here, which is why Fabiano resigned the game. So I start off very well with this win. This pushed me, I believe, to 2.5 points out of 4. Unfortunately, in round 5, I think I got a very promising position, if not, in fact, winning against Sam Sevian, but I was unable to convert it when I got really low on time. That game would ultimately end in a draw. And in the 6th round, as in the 5th game, I played against Sam Shanklin, where I got a really, really nice position. Probably was winning, maybe not winning, but I was much better if not winning. I proceeded to make about 3-4 bad moves in a row, got low on time, and unfortunately, I lost my first game of the event, which means that I'm on a score of 3 points out of 6, which is exactly even. So not the score I want in this event. At the end of the day, it's still not the end of the world. Obviously, playing against a lot of very strong players here, but certainly not what I was hoping for. I think with a couple, maybe being a little bit sharper, perhaps moving a little bit quicker, perhaps I could have scored like 4, 4.5 out of 6, could be leading the event. At any rate, I don't try to look back and dwell on things, so it's not that big of a deal. Alas, it's not what I want, but I'm still having a decent event. So On that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap. Make sure to hit that subscribe button below if you haven't already. And I will be back tomorrow with another recap after the final day of the Fisher Random or Chess 9LX event here in St. Louis. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys very soon. Have a great one. Bye.